My name is Emma T. Katz. I'm a student here in the Brown RISD dual degree program, and I'm a medical chimera. But let's back things up a little bit. This is what I looked like in 2017. I was receiving intense chemotherapy in order to receive a bone marrow transplant, a precious procedure that was my only chance at living. So how did I go from this to this? I was fresh out of high school when I suddenly came down with a cold. But this cold worsened rapidly, and by the end of a week, I was barely clinging to consciousness. I went to see a doctor who performed a barrage of tests and immediately admitted me to the ICU. I don't remember this day very well. It was the same day I was put on life support. I had total lung failure. I've been pretty healthy my whole life. I never really got sick. I've never smoked. I've never broken more than a pinky bone. But all of a sudden, I was 18, I was on life support, and to make things worse, my doctors had no idea why. Desperately sick kids who mystify doctors aren't new. In 1960, a little girl named Nancy Lowry began to feel sick and lethargic. Her doctors performed tests and diagnosed her with aplastic anemia. Our body's bone marrow is our body's production factory for red, white, and platelet blood cells. Nancy's bone marrow factory was shutting down, and without it, she was going to die. Desperately casting about for anything to save Nancy, her doctors wrote to a physician named E. Donald Thomas, begging him to help her. In the 1950s, Dr. Thomas had a lofty goal. He wanted to cure leukemia and other blood cancers, and he had designed a new sort of therapy. If leukemia attacks the body's bone marrow, Dr. Thomas thought that the transplantation of a new, healthy bone marrow might produce cancer-free blood and restore an immune system. He had already begun researching on rats, but had yet to reproduce these outcomes in humans. Despite these failures, when Nancy's doctors begged him to help, he agreed. You see, Nancy had a secret weapon. She was an identical twin. My doctors were still struggling to get a definitive diagnosis. They did not know why I was sick, and I was in pretty bad conditions. After a few weeks in the hospital, I was discharged with a lot of muscle loss, a lot of PTSD, and an open tracheostomy hole in my neck. But just as we thought things were getting better, I started sleeping worse. I began to feel paranoid. I stopped remembering to take my medication. I didn't know why I wasn't feeling well again. And then I started having migraines. Terrible, earth-shattering migraines that felt like someone was drilling inside of my skull. We went to the hospital, and this was around the time when I stopped being able to read. I regressed to a 4th grade literary level, and even then, it was still hard. My doctors gave me a brain biopsy, and they discovered what we feared. I had over 30 lesions in my brain, the largest of which were in my hippocampus, affecting my short-term memory and my ability to read. My doctors concluded that whatever had attacked my lungs before was now at work in my brain. Back in 1960, as Nancy was suffering and close to death, her identical twin sister, Barbara, was completely healthy. Dr. Thomas flew to Seattle. Genetically, identical twins share the same markers in their blood. He hoped that if he used Barbara's bone marrow, Nancy's body wouldn't reject it as a foreign element. On August 12, 1960, Barbara was sedated, and she endured over 50 extractions in her bone with a large bore needle. The bone marrow was removed from her and dripped into Nancy's veins, and it stuck. Nancy's body began to reproduce healthy white blood cells again. Today, Nancy is a healthy 67-year-old. Dr. Thomas's procedure had worked against all odds, but he wasn't satisfied. He quickly set his sights on improving the procedure. Nancy and Barbara's transplant had been successful because As identical twins, their cells were perfectly matched. But how could he replicate this result with non-identical twins? My doctors still weren't sure exactly what was causing all of my issues. In a last-ditch resort, they sent me in for genetic testing, and it came back positive. I had a fatal genetic disease called HLH, hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis, and I had inherited it from my parents. Unbeknownst to anyone, they each had a recessive gene, and I lost the 1 in 4 genetic lottery. HLH creates a failure of the natural killer cells to actually kill bad cells, which means my whole life, my body's been nothing but a ticking time bomb. Most HLH patients aren't ever diagnosed. Their bodies will overreact to an infection, and they will die of multi-organ failure. The treatment I had received for my lungs and brain had alleviated my symptoms, but it hadn't stopped them. I was running out of time. A lot has changed since Dr. Thomas's day. When I told you the story of Nancy and Barbara, you probably imagined that bone marrow transplants are still extracted painfully from the bone. But now we have options. Peripheral blood is most commonly used, and bone extraction is reserved for extremely rare cases. For peripheral blood, patients will be hooked up to an apheresis machine, and they will donate through a blood draw. I want to do a quick little poll. Has anyone in the audience ever donated platelets or plasma on an apheresis machine? If you can, could you raise your hands, please? Okay, I'm gonna guess what that was like for you, all right? And I want you to let me know if I missed anything. So, when you went in to donate, they probably asked you some screener questions. They wanted to make sure that you don't have any issues that would preclude a safe and healthy donation. Okay, all sound correct? When you go in, they hook you up to a machine like this with an IV, and you sit there for a few hours as they pump out your blood, filter out what they need, and put it back in your veins. It might have hurt a little bit, but not too much, and they at least gave you snacks afterwards. Does that all sound correct? That is essentially all that you do to donate bone marrow now. No more large bore needles, no more surgeries, no more sedation, no more need for twin matches. You don't even need to travel anywhere. The doctors and matching agencies will do all the work to transport your sample for you. To sign up, you swab your cheek and send it in the mail to a matching agency like Be The Match, a worldwide bone marrow registry. Be The Match records 10 to 13 markers on your blood and looks for anyone in the world who shares those similar markers. To have the best chance of a bone marrow transplant being successful, you want to match on those markers, human leukocyte antigens. Because human leukocyte antigens are inherited, some of this is tied to ethnicity. What does this mean? This means you will only ever donate to someone with a very similar ethnic background as you. For me, as a white person, my donor would have to be white. And I never knew that this would be a factor in finding a match. But here's where things get complicated. The overwhelming majority of registered bone marrow donors in the world are white, which means the overwhelming majority of patients who have a chance at matching and surviving are also white. For a white person like me, I have an almost 80% chance of matching with a compatible donor. But for people of color and mixed race patients, those numbers of matching and survival are far lower. So why does this happen? A lot of this comes down to where and how information about bone marrow transplants is disseminated in the country. Can you raise your hand if, before this talk, before you heard me speak, you assumed that a bone marrow donation would involve an incredibly invasive surgery instead of a very painless blood draw? Almost everyone. That's not your fault. We don't have a good messaging system in this country or education about these procedures. In other countries, like Germany, bone marrow donation centers proliferate. They have about 30 in their country alone, far outpacing the United States. In fact, a huge number of white bone marrow donors are men from Germany. A 10th of Germany's eligible population is registered to donate. So what could the United States do differently? I would love it if we built more registration centers in this country and had more registration fairs at colleges, churches, and other social gathering places. If more people knew that these procedures are easy and simple blood draws instead of incredibly invasive surgeries, I'm sure they would want to sign up. I'm alive today because of a man I have never met named Chris. He signed up at the Gwasanaeth Gwaed Cymru Welsh Blood Service when he was 19 after his mother died of cancer. He was never called to donate until we matched 17 years later. All of the people in the world, and the only person who could save my life is a man I have never met. I am standing here with you right now because he swabbed his cheek so many years ago. I'm speaking to you because he sat down to donate blood for a few hours and walked out the same day. I didn't squander this precious gift. I worked really, really, really hard to get my life back on track, to read again, to walk again. I wanted to give up most of the time. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. But I didn't. Today, I can walk again. I can read again. And I'm incredibly privileged to study here at one of the most prestigious universities in the world. I am a medical chimera. My body is mine, but my immune system is his. This is the transplant itself, the single thing that saved my life. It's just a bag of blood. Imagine what you could do with yours.